Well, we've just landed on Inchclarone, and we're on a quay here that, of course, was used in modern times by the islanders, but probably was the historic harbour with a wet dock beside it. This island is called Inchclarone, and the tradition is that Clora, after whom it's named, was the sister of the great Queen Maeve. And according to legend, Queen Maeve retired here, and while she was swimming, one of her Ulster enemies named Forbade had a slingshot over on the mainland, and he killed her with a shot from his sling. But it didn't contain a stone, it contained a piece of very hard cheese, but it did the job. So we're approaching the main group of buildings here now, and you can see straight away that there are a number of stone churches. So this little complex is very much in the Irish tradition of having several churches, rather than the Anglo-Norman tradition, shall we say, of having one, or continental tradition of having one major building complex. But here we have actually got 6 separate churches on the island. The original foundation here was, of course, in early Christian times, and big changes took place in the church in Ireland in the 12th century, in succession to major changes in the European church the preceding century. And one of the changes was the introduction of new religious orders or congregations with special rules that were different to the old Irish rules. And into Inchclarone came the new ideas. And then in the 12th century, or perhaps later, we're not sure, came the Canons Regular of St. Augustine, who were priests and associated people who used the rule of St. Augustine. And the Canons Regular are found all over Ireland, and especially, they're especially strong here on Lough Ree. There are a number of islands with monastic sites, and nearly all of them can be tied into the Canons of St. Augustine. But we can't actually date the arrival of the Canons to Inchclarone. But perhaps it was in the 12th century, because there's a lot of architectural change, as I'll show you, going on then. And that suggests new ideas, of course, coming in, the architecture and the art being the reflection of the new ideas in religion and spirituality. And so they're to be seen here in various places on Inchclarone. So this is the main church, and it's a simple nave, which suggests an early date, because it has got no chancel or choir. And the chancels or choirs, the area for the priest and for the consecration and so on, they come in as a result of the reforms, the Hildebrandine reforms on mainland Europe in the 11th century. So we don't begin to get choirs or chancels here until maybe the late 11th or early 12th century, implying that this building is, to some extent anyway, an older building. And because the stonework there especially is very reminiscent of the stonework on the little church I showed you round the corner, we might say that that wall in particular probably is the oldest. And it could well date from the 10th century or the early 11th century. And that's fairly early for stone buildings in Ireland. And the juxtaposition of the big church beside the Saint's Shrine is repeated in Clonmacnoise, where the main church is beside the building known as St. Kieran's Shrine. Here the main church is beside St. Diarmaid's Shrine. So there seems to be a parallel there. In the 15th century, the more improvements were made. The chapter house behind me, and perhaps other buildings out there. The third church up there is a very plain little rectangle, and you might say, well, that suggests an earlier church, perhaps. But funny thing is, it has a window that's a pointed top to it, which might suggest that it's a sort of transitional window where the Romanesque round arch is moving over to the Gothic pointed arch. Teampall Diarmada, so-called, probably the shrine of the Sairish calendar or collection of saints. And it has all the appearance of being a very old building. It's small in size, it's a simple nave, it's got a flat lintel to the doorway. The jambs of the door are ever so slightly angled, and it has projecting antae, that's to say the side walls project, and all those are features of the earliest, the sort of features you get on the earliest stone buildings in Ireland. And so it probably was the shrine of the saint, just as the very similar little church in Clonmacnoise was, which is called Teampall Ciaran, the Church of St. Ciaran, was the shrine of St. Ciaran. And just as in Clonmacnoise, the big church, which just over my shoulder, is side by side or very close to the little church. And that makes all sense in all sorts of ways if you work it out logically. So it's in some ways nearly the most important building on the island because it's the oldest. And these are very ancient stone churches, because originally churches were built of timber or wattle or clay. That's those sort of perishable substances that indeed cottages were built out of up to the 19th century or so. And they tend to crumble and disappear, and they're only visible to the archaeologists when they come to dig and excavate a site now. But stone buildings often survive. Unless somebody deliberately knocks them down and takes them away, they will survive. And so these have survived. So they could date from the 10th century and possibly even the 10th century, which was amongst the earliest churches, stone churches in Ireland, and maybe the big church might date from the 11th century, or could even be contemporary with this. Part of the stonework is very similar to the stonework on this, as I showed you. So it's an important part of the monastic complex. And you can see from here the perimeter of the complex running round more or less as the tree line does. So it's a huge enclosure. Many other monastic enclosures that I've been to are quite impressive, but in size, I don't think I've ever been to one like this. And typically of an early Christian monastic enclosure, it's ovoid in shape. They're round or ovoid, rather than, square shaped or rectangular shaped. And this one fits that bill perfectly well. And now I'd like to show you my great discovery. Well, it's my wife's great discovery, to be exact. It's just over here. Now, you can see here the telltale Romanesque chevron pattern, zigzag like a sergeant's stripe. And on the adjoining stone, there are little beads. You see them there? Again, a characteristic Romanesque motif. And here they are, set together. The rest is gone. No dig has ever been taken place below. Have we an entrance? Have we even the entrance to the enclosure here? Or were they put in by a later farmer to facilitate getting in and out of the field? That is the question. And different archaeologists have come here with me and looked at it, and some have said, oh, it's definitely the farmer, and others have said, oh, it could well be the gate to the original enclosure. If we conducted an excavation around here, if the archaeologists conducted an excavation around here, it would probably show up the answer to that question. But Mrs. Murtagh discovered that when we were cruising around here, and nobody else did for the last hundreds of years. So we're very proud of that discovery.